Over on Alcatraz Island, the general public is aware of the surface. However, recent research has uncovered subterranean structures and passageways beneath the prison yard. Historically, Alcatraz has been perceived by the public as nothing more than a cold, lonely, and difficult to evade prison. However, that was not the whole story. A cave that had been concealed behind a wall that had not been indicated on the plans was discovered in the year 2025. They had to paint around the vent because what was inside wasn't actually jail property. The officers turned pale as soon as they entered the building. There were unexplained symbols, 3D scanned replicas of the heads used in the 1962 escape, long-lost technology, and an undiscovered object at the bottom. They scraped the concrete away from this vent using metal spoons they had made. The legend of the long-lost caverns beneath Alcatraz begins here. Our entire world will be rocked by the discoveries made by the scientists inside. Long considered a metaphor for total shackling, Alcatraz Island sits in San Francisco Bay. It has witnessed countless untold stories as it stands silently. Nearly everyone recognizes it as the location of a former federal prison that housed some of America's most notorious criminals. Now it's a popular destination for tourists. The crumbling rooms and weathered walls conceal a darker truth, though. It appears, at first look, to be a historically significant location where guards once kept a careful watch on inmates. However, beneath all the calm and concrete, there is a hidden truth. For decades, it remained hidden because of the danger it posed. The museum and visitor areas were being expanded in 2025 by a crew of construction workers, as is customary. They came across something extremely peculiar while working. It appeared to be a minor issue with the infrastructure initially. However, an unusual sight emerged as they began to work the stone, an immovable wall. Although the stonework had seen better days, it still did not conform to any pre-existing blueprints for the prison's layout. Distinct from the weathered walls surrounding it, the structure was imposing and icy. The government had never documented the existence of the secret tunnel that ran behind it. The discovery sparked the most startling revelation in the island's history. It was a long-lost tale, either meant to remain untold or buried for good reason. When the crew initially discovered something, they were confused and had to immediately bring in specialists from other industries. No one on the island had any idea this section of the prison existed, so the authorities there were perplexed. It appeared as though the wall had been deliberately concealed in order to conceal its contents. The only sound that broke the eerie stillness as the stone was delicately removed was the sound of the waves lapping against the bay's shore. The employees were caught unawares by the revelation. It took me to a place far stranger than the forgotten room I had been in before. Everybody had to find a way out of their cell, right? That wall that shouldn't have been there, a tiny opening with a slot for airflow, was present. A far more sinister secret was concealed by what appeared to be a mundane repair corridor. Due to years of neglect and accumulation of dust, the wall revealed itself to be an artificial barrier. The structure did not conform to any existing blueprints, official documents, or prison floor plans. Designed to blend in with its environment, this enigma eluded detection by even the most trained eyes. A brief shaft descended into the shadows behind it. The air was thick and musty due to the lack of light and air for decades. Near the island, the tunnel was the chilliest place you could imagine. As if time had halted, it appeared. No footprints or other evidence of previous habitation could be found. The site had been sealed off from history, leaving only its remnants. The depth of the hole was greater than that of any known portion of the island's structure, and it appeared to go on forever, but no matter how meticulously records have been kept over the years, nothing has ever been found regarding this location. Throughout its history, as both a military fort and a maximum security prison, no account of Alcatraz ever made reference to anything like that. No plans included this hidden section of the island, and no guards or inmates who spoke publicly or wrote memoirs about their experiences there ever mentioned it. That the memory of the shaft and everything within it had been entirely wiped clean. It appeared as though the islanders had either forgotten or deliberately concealed this location. For what reason was this peculiar door kept hidden for such a long time, and what might be behind it? The truth would eventually emerge, but nobody anticipated how it would. What began as a routine expansion project soon became a portal to a history no one had ever imagined. Confidential information on the island was about to break free from its confines. Sorry, but no entry. The police wasted no time in securing the area after receiving the initial alert. Federal officials, including those from the DHS and the Bureau of Prisons, swiftly seized control of the region. The initial assumption was that the site was merely a long-lost utility location, possibly a section of a defunct drainage system. Finding long-abandoned infrastructure in a location as ancient as Alcatraz wouldn't have been surprising. However, as the investigation progressed, it became apparent that this wasn't your average subterranean corridor. Instead of the flimsy materials typically used in abandoned construction sites, the cave's walls were fortified with thick steel supports. The supports weren't randomly positioned. Rather, they were angled at precise, predetermined slopes to dampen vibrations and noise. Despite being able to withstand significant pressure and movement, the designer of this tunnel spared no effort in making it barely perceptible. It had obviously been neglected or worn down over the years, so its absence was obvious. It was deliberately concealed. The location of the tunnel was even more peculiar. Subterranean beneath the notoriously secure and constantly monitored federal prison, this hidden passageway had lain dormant for decades. It wasn't merely concealed, it was meticulously concealed to ensure that no one could discover it. Underneath the layers of secrecy, rock, and steel, what was this so crucial and perilous? The discontinuity in the passage of time. Something far worse emerged as the agents continued to investigate. The cave's steel supports were not from the era you might expect. In addition to the steel's unusual composition, a comprehensive metallurgical analysis revealed that its serial numbers extended back to 1921, long before Alcatraz was considered as a potential site for a federal prison. Just by itself, this finding disproved the conventional wisdom about the island's historical evolution. From its humble beginnings as a military prison, Alcatraz was transformed into the world-renowned federal prison it is today as early as the 1930s. Building projects intended to ready the island's infrastructure for the arrival of its most infamous criminals are among the many records that have always pertained to this transformation. Nevertheless, the presence of these steel supports, which predate the penitentiary's original construction, indicates that the structure is considerably older and more intricate. Aside from that, these pre-1921 steel supports were sunk deep within Alcatraz in areas that are off limits to visitors. Their arrival prompted many inexplicable inquiries. Were these tunnels dug before the prison was even built? Was it merely a long-forgotten military installation, or was it part of a larger design for a structure unrelated to Alcatraz's famed role as a federal prison? The time difference affected every aspect of the island's history, not just the technology. Long has the public believed that Alcatraz was a maximum security prison for violent offenders. A halt was on the horizon, though, when construction techniques and materials from a bygone era were unearthed. For how long had something been buried in this cave, and what was its purpose? Once straightforward and easy to understand, the timeline now appeared to be a well-planned illusion. The clues appeared to be buried far deeper than anybody had anticipated. The atmosphere began to shift as the group continued down the meandering corridor outside the prison walls. The thicker, chillier air seemed to be burdened with long-buried secrets. There had never been a prison passage like it. The construction of the tunnel required far too much planning and attention to detail. Typical wear and tear on escape routes, such as broken stone or improvised repairs, did not appear. There was clearly something far more significant concealed within the sturdy structure than a handful of inmates attempting to flee. With each twist, they drew farther and further underground, avoiding paths that were known to others. The walls were originally constructed entirely of stone, the layers of protection built up over time, beginning with a granite wall, continuing with a layer of thick stone bricks, and ending with a lead-based sealant. The second one had an unusual way of reflecting light, as if its surface were concealing its true nature. The longer the probe lingered in the tunnel, the more unnerving it became. Continuing to reinforce the tube did not appear to be warranted. It appeared to have been purpose-built for concealment only. Just when they thought they had mastered every turn, the corridor shrank, drawing them in the direction of what lay ahead. A massive, rusted door set into the reinforced stone, which appeared more like the last obstacle than a mere gate. The crew used heavy equipment to force open the door, revealing its contents. As soon as the door was closed, it appeared as though time had come to a halt within the room. A peculiar freezing had taken place inside, affecting everything. Their initial impression was of the eerily quiet atmosphere. Neither dust nor rats were scurrying about in the stuffy air. It was painfully silent in there. It appeared as though the area had been preserved, as if it had always been intended to remain undisturbed. There were shelves along the inside walls, but they weren't stocked with old supplies or jail records. On the contrary, they uncovered meticulously stacked stacks of aged papers that had naturally faded with the passage of time. Despite their fragility, the paper's deliberate assembly was obvious. Sea currents were depicted on hand-drawn maps with worn edges. Locations marked with strange symbols initially belied their apparent significance. There were no standard records of guards or prisoners at this facility. Instead, there were maps of maritime routes, secrecy notes, and strange writings in languages nobody could decipher. The walls seemed to be pulsating with an unspoken history. Midway through the room, the most unsettling discovery was a collection of vintage radios, their wires protruding and easily broken. These served a different purpose than allowing inmates to communicate with one another. As it relates to the Cold War, the true purpose of the tunnel became apparent as the investigators meticulously examined the artifacts discovered in the hidden chambers. Documents discovered in secure metal containers discuss a clandestine undertaking codenamed Warden's Shadow. This moniker did not appear in any official or public record, be it a database, a jail log, or a historical record. One of the most terrifying things discovered was a reel-to-reel recorder containing a plethora of coded messages. This tape looked old and worn. The method's resemblance to CIA-level technology was immediately apparent to experts, indicating that it was difficult to crack even by modern standards. Unlike the typical messages exchanged between jail staff and inmates, these were completely out of place in a correctional facility. The communications appeared to pertain to military operations that extended well beyond the confines of Alcatraz prison. Strategic information was discussed. Further investigation uncovered numerous surveillance logs which contained extensive records unrelated to the operation of the prison, as well as blueprints and schematics. On the contrary, these articles detailed extensive monitoring operations, including the systematic observation of government employees and identified visitors in each room. The purpose of this structure was never to house criminals or aid in their rehabilitation. It may have housed inmates of a different kind and was a highly technological covert listening post and surveillance control center. It was highly probable that the prison had served as a center for Cold War espionage due to the presence of CIA equipment and allusions to other intelligence organizations. The purpose of this structure was not to be escaped, but rather to conceal, observe, and document. For a long time, no one knew about it because there were no official records to prove its existence. It appeared as though the structure had been involved in larger Cold War operations due to its remote location and proximity to key military installations in the Bay Area. The location was ideal for secret intelligence gathering due to its isolation, security, and relative tranquility, all of which could be viewed as advantages for clandestine operations. The failed attempt at evasion. The now famous 1962 escape attempt, long interpreted as a courageous display of desperation, suddenly took on a different connotation. The long-standing official narrative held that, in a final attempt to escape, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers constructed improvised boats and slipped past the island's guards. But the more the agents examined the newly discovered infrastructure, the more they started to doubt that was the true story of the escape. Found in the sealed room was an old, worn-out letter purportedly written by one of the escapees, John Anglin, many years after the event. A startling new concept was hinted at. Contrary to previous assumptions, Anglin outlined the escape plan in the letter. According to him, the prison break wasn't an impulsive struggle for survival, but rather a meticulously orchestrated operation using hidden pathways that the guards might not have been aware of and that might have been set up for purposes unrelated to the escape. Imagine for a second that the evaders weren't attempting to ford the frigid San Francisco Bay. Imagine instead that they were making use of a sophisticated, covert system that was integrated into the very fabric of the prison. Is it possible that they were making use of a clandestine network that had been in operation for some time? He later clarified that the escape was not about darting out into the dark, but rather about a prearranged departure through hidden pathways. By following these tunnels, they may be able to evade capture by the authorities, avoid contact with open water, and access a hidden system that had long been there but gone unnoticed. New evidence suggests the recently discovered tunnel system may have crossed over with the hidden infrastructure. A web of pipes and channels leading below the prison provides an apparent escape route, and the dimensions of the secret passages discovered during the investigation seem to coincide suspiciously with their placement. It appears that more than just escaping was considered when designing the walls, corridors, and even the floor plans of the escape route. The theory that the fugitive wasn't just a criminal trying to evade justice, but rather a part of a massive intelligence operation gained traction. The inmates' escape was orchestrated by forces beyond their control, according to the timing, the enigmatic papers, and the hidden passages. This is a deeply disturbing conclusion. The terrifying possibility that the escape was orchestrated using a system meant for far more covert operations rather than a desperate attempt to flee was a constant companion. How had this secret mission been kept from the public, and what was its true purpose? Many took the escape as evidence of the resourcefulness and ingenuity of human beings for a long time. We now saw it as a spectral warning of the mysteries that lay beneath the island's surface, secrets that might alter our entire understanding of Alcatraz. By the end they had located them, investigators uncovered what could only be described as a long-buried secret beneath the far wall of the chamber, concealed behind a panel that had been bent from years of exposure to the salty air and damp conditions of Alcatraz. For decades, the panel, first perceived as nothing more than an unusual structural element, remained hidden from the public eye. When it was removed, the contents shocked the experts, who turned pale. 5 bones were discovered in an apparently deliberate arrangement, all of which were straight. It looked like they were in a formal or military stance, with their hands clasped together. Despite their advanced years, their uniforms were spotless. The fact that these individuals were neither inmates of Alcatraz nor regular prison employees was the most shocking thing to the investigators. They were completely unrelated to the criminal justice system in certain respects. The symbols stitched into their uniforms were even more disturbing. Not even the Secret Service or the military were able to locate them, symbolic of something that provided more questions than answers. These folks were so different from everyone else that they almost didn't fit in with their era. All over the floor, next to their bodies, were sealed packages. The public was obviously not meant to know what they said. A carefully labeled, vacuum-sealed biological sample was contained in each of these cases. These codes were too complex for the investigators to decipher at this time, but there was no doubt that they were tied to an enterprise that deviated significantly from the norm in terms of criminal activity. The squad fell into a melancholy quietness as the shock went off. Many years had passed with no indication of who or what had confined these individuals to this long-abandoned chamber. Even though the specialists there were aware of what was coming, they were unprepared for what they witnessed. A shiver ran down their spines as the probe drew inward, revealing the terrifying truth. They had located them. A wave of bewilderment accompanied the discovery of long-buried, covered up, and hidden information. Would you like to know who these bodies belong to and why they ended up in a location like Alcatraz? The rumblings became more audible as the discovery's implications became apparent. The public would never see the larger plot that they were pointing to. Discovering corpses wasn't enough. They needed to understand their purpose for being there. What gave these unknown individuals the idea to be laid to rest in the hidden sections of Alcatraz, a notoriously secluded and notoriously hardened criminal's lair? With each new round of DNA testing and investigation, the solutions remained elusive. Recounts following the analysis carried the sickening phrase, "They finally found them." This did not mean captivity, but confinement. Alcatraz was in no way merely a prison. The fact that it housed some of the world's most notorious criminals was never its sole purpose. A lot darker and more complicated truth lay beneath the surface of the story that the world was led to believe about this renowned island. For as long as anyone could remember, Alcatraz was just a facade, a location chosen for its historical significance, relative isolation, and difficulty of access. There was more going on behind those prison walls than simply incarcerating individuals. There were massive operations going on there that the general public had no idea about. It was also a prison. The newly discovered tunnel that extended deep into the island was never intended to serve as a means of escape for the inmates. That wasn't it. Something far worse was involved. Never before had a prison been constructed using the materials that made up the walls of this tunnel. Their intended function was to filter out background noise and conceal it from prying ears. Everything about the structure suggested that it was designed to endure and remain unseen. As the pieces of evidence were assembled by the authorities, suddenly the purpose of this tube became crystal clear. It was a holding cell, not an escape route. As the research progressed, the more significant concerns began to seep in. The island served as more than just a prison. It was an integral node in a vast web of clandestine operations. Details of these operations, which encompassed espionage, information gathering, psychological testing, and concealment from the public eye, were concealed in classified documents. What was most terrifying was their realization that Alcatraz's relative quiet had never been due to the passage of time. It was always more than a coincidence. The secrecy had always been deliberate. Those in the know knew exactly what needed to be hidden and how disastrous it would be if the truth were to leak. By analyzing the remnants, specialists were able to determine that the site was more than just a long-lost prison. Thorough preparation went into the operation. Someone built a containment site for something far scarier than anybody had anticipated. Because of the discovery, a new kind of investigation was launched which extended well beyond the island. It ventured into uncharted territory, involving a wide range of governments and agencies. One thing was certain: the perpetual quiet surrounding Alcatraz wasn't due to a lack of interest. Rather, it was a strategy to maintain order as the world prepared to uncover the secrets concealed within the island's weathered stone walls. The contents were never meant to be revealed. Do you have any idea what the actual purpose of the tube beneath Alcatraz was? A means of egress, a control room, or what the hell? Put your thoughts into the space provided. Sharing this film with you was a blast. Catch you later.